Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Season 4 of the Vimy Foundation's podcast Beyond the Ridge, a series exploring Canada's contributions to the First World War and the experts who continue to uncover our past. Join us this season as we discuss the topic of digital memory and how technology is helping us connect with history in new ways. My name is Caitlin Bailey, and I am the Executive Director of the Vimy Foundation. Today we're going to be discussing the exciting Livy Stories update to our Vimy Living Memorial app, which now allows users to scan names on the Vimy Memorial to access biographies, photos, and records of fallen soldiers. This initiative was developed in partnership with Veterans Affairs Canada and with the technology for the name scanning feature provided by Memory Anchor. Joining us today are John DeRosier, Director of International Operations for Veterans Affairs Canada, and Ryan Mullins, co-founder of Memory Anchor, to discuss the work involved in bringing this project to life. So, Ryan, John, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome,
Thanks.
welcome. Hi, John. So we're all calling in from different places today. So, John, why don't you tell us where you're calling in from?
Absolutely. So I have the privilege of calling in from the Allward House at the Canadian National Vimy Memorial site here in France.
Wonderful. And Ryan.
I am calling in from Calgary. We're sitting about minus 25, so I'm trying to keep warm.
Beautiful weather, the usual. It's winter time in Calgary, and I'm calling in from Montreal. So we are three time zones, three countries, and coming in this morning to talk to everyone a little bit about digital commemoration and the work that we all do to try to put these projects together. So we'll start just with a little bit of background on the project. Ryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your role with Memory Anchor and how you became involved, and then we'll turn it over to you, John.
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder of Memory Anchor. It actually, our company, our purpose really is to change the way the world remembers, and we are about trying to share these commemorative stories in new ways with emerging technology. And it actually was inspired by my trip to the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge and being on the site and seeing all the cemeteries there and just wondering how we could tell these stories in new ways for future generations. And so that's really how the company started. And then, of course, with the work that we've been doing and connecting with yourself, we've been able to bring this technology to your wonderful app.
Super, thanks, Ryan. And John, how did you end up in the Allward House?
Absolutely. So I'm the director of international operations, as you described. Veterans Affairs Canada is the steward of 15 Canadian and Newfoundland First World War memorial sites here in Europe, 9 here in France, 4 in Belgium, 1 in the UK, and then 1 in Turkey. And part of my responsibilities is to manage a team of VAC employees on the day-to-day operations of these sites, from mowing, making sure the grass is mowed, to ensuring the monuments are kept to the standards they need to be. But the other important piece is how we interpret these sites. We have a wonderful student guide program that is available at both the 2 National Historic Sites and in addition to the guides, having visitor education centers where people from all over the world can come and discover a little bit of Canada's role in the First World War, and certainly learn about the sacrifice, the fact that we have thousands of Canadians that lost their lives here on the battlefields and are forever in rest here on the sites.
Super, thanks, John. I personally think you have one of the most interesting jobs of people that I know. So it's always wonderful to hear a little bit more about what you do and how you do it. Um, so, John, just a question for you. How do you think this update's going to change the way that people interact with the Canadian National Vimy Memorial and the people that are commemorated on it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think before I get into the impact of the new digital improvements, it's let's call a fact a fact. The Canadian National Vimy Memorial is an iconic place. Anybody who visits the site, being Canadian or not, they're overwhelmed and impressed by the actual site itself. From the scarred terrain of the battlefield. That 100 years on, you still see, the where the trenches were, where the bombardments and the shell holes are. Getting to walk the same path in the preserved trenches and the Grange Tunnel that our Canadian soldiers would have walked just before hours before the battles started. And as Ryan mentioned earlier, and visiting the cemeteries and row upon row of Canadians and others who have lost their lives, their names etched on these headstones, not only their names, but the ages, so young. And then you get to the Vimy Memorial, such an impressive piece of art. Walter Hallward was ahead of his game when he created that. But as you get closer to that monument, closer, you see the names of the 11,285 that lost their lives and have no known graves. You can't walk the cemeteries of these soldiers. And being able to now, with this Living Stories update, not only touch the names, feel the names and look at them, but actually with your phone, get to unravel the stories of those soldiers and go a little bit deeper than a name. And I think that's the impressive piece. Our whole goal is to enhance visitor experience, to ensure that we continue to share the names of all those who've lost their lives and sacrificed for Canada, but to be able to do it in that digital space. And the other advantage, of course, is that we get to bring this back to more Canadians. Not every Canadian is going to have the opportunity to travel to northern France. So allowing that feature to allow Canadians from coast to coast to uncover some of these soldiers, this is just fantastic for us.
Super, thanks, John. And Ryan, we wouldn't be able to do it actually without all of the technology that Memory Anchor has been working very hard on. So, can you give us a little bit of a brief explanation on what kind of technology we're actually using here? What are we using to be able to scan these names and create these stories from these over 11,000 files?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't want to explain it in a way that bores everyone because at the end of the day, people want to be able to go up to the monument and have stories brought to them. And the technology is really designed to do that, is to reduce the barrier. It's in essence a new form of search engine. So instead of having to sit there and type up a name on an internet site and hope you find something, what it's doing is using something called OCR, which is optical character recognition. So the technology literally is reading the different names that the user is pointing their phone at. And from that, it goes through a process of recognizing the name, searching a database, and then bringing that story that that you're looking at. So again, it's going from a name to an actual story, and that's what in essence it's doing. There's a lot of nuances that are happening in between, but one of the specific things is there's on device as well, which makes this quite special. Two is because sometimes there's limited internet connectivity, but we still want users to be able to access and find those stories. So there's actually two things that are happening and two kinds of technology in there.
Super. And anyone who's been to the Vimy Memorial will know that the Wi-Fi up there is, it has its own ecosystem and its own life, and it lives as it chooses. It was certainly one of the major things when I was there for the very first time trying to run a shop with a payment device that I remember very, very well. So it's the access to that, I think, on device is one of the really critical pieces that certainly at the Vimy Foundation we've always considered when we're dealing with these tools. Is it needs to be able to function as well with no Wi-Fi or no network as it does with a network. So, you are, as you said, you're using optical character recognition. What kinds of things did you find when the team was working to make that OCR work on what is essentially not a flat surface? It's a wall, it's a tilted, it's got all the things that you would think of a wall outside. What are some of the challenges that you found when you were working on that?
Yeah, well, like you said, there's a variety of different challenges that come up. First is the internet connectivity, which is why we have that kind of fallback ability to be able to use it still on device. So it's actually powered by your device. And then there's a whole bunch of different issues that come in when we think of viewing angles and different things like that. Because what's happening is OCR is recognizing alphabetical letters. And what we needed to do is be able to train our model in a way that it could recognize more effectively the kind of letters and the writing and but the style too. Because if you go to the monument, you'll notice like the names are quite tight together. And so this issue of recognizing the letter, like making sure a G is not recognized as a C,
Hmm.
but then there's spacing too, because you'll have like the initials and then the last name, but you'll also have somebody else's name there. So it's really tricky to be able to train it to return results with a high level of reliability without it getting confused. And so a lot of different hurdles in terms of just what the software and the current technology can do. But the exciting thing is it's always getting better. And we were able to train an effective model that could have a high level of reliability while people were there scanning it.
Hmm. And John, can you just let everybody know for their information, those letters that are those names that are on the wall of the Vimy Memorial, they are hand carved, are they not?
Yeah, for the
For the
originals
most
were
part,
hand
yeah.
carved, hand carved by stonemasons, and then certainly during the renovations in the early 2000s, there would have been more industrial tools used to do some of the carvings. But Ryan's example, is wonderful in the testament of Allward. Allward's vision when they created the monument, he didn't necessarily want the
Hmm.
11,285 names originally on there, right? So he engraved them in such a way they almost act as a ribbon, almost from afar. You don't see them.
Hmm.
So, 100 years on, as we've got digital tools, one of the challenges is how's that software actually recognize them? So it's a unique his vision to try to incorporate the names to have at least like not to be the same tablets as you may see in
Hmm.
other monuments. 100 years on, it is the technological challenges that we have in introducing new software.
Hmm. Absolutely. And they are, they're serif letters. They're not always uniform. So you're not dealing with something like um, a page on the internet that, you can train an OCR to read really, really easily. So it certainly has been a bit of a challenge for us. The other challenge that I did want to ask you about, Ryan, is the historical records. Obviously, you're dealing with
Mm,
11,000 and plus files, 11,285, John, yes?
Yes.
Yes,
mhm.
11,285 files that have been very kindly provided to us by Veterans Affairs Canada. Um, what kind of issues when you were working with those and your team was working with those to try to be able to provide a natural reading story for each of these people? What kind of issues did you find you faced then?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because we're going back over 100 years to handwritten and typed files, and being able to use that information in a way that is going to be meaningful becomes challenging. And of course, we're humans, so there's going to be errors in there, and it's actually really interesting to see how the technology has highlighted different errors in files and even engravings there. But as time marches on, we get different names of places or places that don't even exist anymore, and we have to be able to find ways to handle these and create a narrative around that. So there's a ton of historical information that are basically has the human touch in it, which means there's
Mhm.
going to be errors. And to be able to handle that was it takes a lot of trial and error in essence. And that's where, like the Vimy team, the VAC team, and getting this into people's hands early on to test it and see how things are working, and then make those adjustments in the front end, the back end, so that again, we're reducing the barriers of stories, but reducing the errors. And because I think that's one of the most important things is when it comes to this information, we want to be as accurate as possible. And so we use AI technology as a way to help manage, because that's the only way to scale. Because, historically, you'll be able to highlight maybe 50 names, 100 names, and do them really well. But we want to be able to try giving the stories back to everyone. And the only way to do that at scale is to use AI, but we don't want to introduce more errors into the record. So it's something that really has to be handled carefully and done well.
Absolutely. And in three separate languages.
And three separate languages, yes, which is a challenge in itself.
Which has been a challenge in itself, and making sure that we have protocols for each of the three languages that respect the rules of those languages, plus the difference certainly on the French side with the fact that the units that we're dealing with from 100 years ago did not have bilingual names like Canadian units now have. And so we're having to create, it's almost one of the things that when I've been talking to the team on our side that has spent all this time treating the files, and the thing that really struck me was how much of this project has turned into how can we teach the public about why they're seeing what they're seeing. So we're not just giving an error message or giving a piece of information and letting it loose. There's actually a series in here that says, why am I seeing what I'm seeing? Why is this way? Why do I have English battalion names in the French? Things like that. Why are place names not bilingual? That we're trying to just be able to provide information on that. So speaking of errors, John, this historical research side, certainly we're dealing with multitudes of things. We're dealing with aliases. We're dealing with remains that have later been found. We're dealing with, or identified, I should say. We're dealing with non-English language names that have been anglicized, and all those different types of things. So what are some of the stories as your team and the VAC Guide team has worked to research these stories? What are some of the things that stood out to them and to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll just go back and maybe say there was an opportunity or a blessing around when we were all faced with the pandemic and everybody needed to be hunkered back in their houses. I remember it was late February of 2020, and we got this message that the pandemic was increasing in numbers here in France, and we had to make a decision right there and then. Let's send the guides home, our student guides, just to make sure that should we get locked down, at least they're back in Canada. And sure enough, 10 days later, there was decisions made, and travel became very, very difficult. But what we did from there is kept the guides working, right? They weren't physically on the sites, but then we said, hey, we need to keep them working, and what can we do? And that's where the idea or the initiative of what we called the Ghosts of Vimy was created. And ideally, we had those guides start doing research on the 11,285 names on the memorial. What we have for the First World War records, we go to library and archives, they've digitized enlistment papers, and that's some of the tombstone information, some where they enlisted, maybe what their trade was. And again, as Ryan said, it was all dependent on the recruiting officer and how they wrote down a name or how they interpreted a name, and in lies some of the early challenges. But what the guides were able to do is start peeling back the onion. So they started looking at things on the internet, punched in names, and all of a sudden maybe a picture popped up or a link to a community across the country. And the onion just kept getting peeled back and back, and we were able to start formulating stories. So the name actually now had a story behind it. Might be that it was a young soldier from out west that was a farmer that had immigrated from Scotland, or maybe it was a fisher from the East Coast that decided to go enlist with his buddies, thinking that they were only going to be gone for a few months. But an interesting story that came as part of the guide's research was actually of a private Takeshi Sichi, and I'm probably going to get his name wrong. He was a sailor on a merchant ship from Japan, and before coming to Canada at the age of 16. So already in the on the water as in the merchant ships as early as 16. Settles in Calgary, Alberta, doing labor jobs, and then volunteers his service in the First World War. So a young Japanese person comes to Canada, takes on some labor jobs, and next thing you know, he's volunteering to be in the Canadian military. In his early records, it shows that he really had a passion or commitment for his homeland. On his arm was tattooed a British flag and a Japanese flag. Went on to serve for the Canadians, and unfortunately was fatally wounded by shrapnel in the Regina Trench during the Battle of Somme. And he's believed to be one of 54 Japanese Canadians killed during the combat. And his name is on the Canadian Memorial. There's a testament of a young individual that immigrated to Canada to start a new life and enlisted early and wanted to contribute to his new nation. Some of that the information the guys found were just through some internet research, but what happened is that research then connected to an organization on the West Coast, who had a connection to a museum back in Japan. And from there we were able to see some really cool records, because when he was writing back to where? Back to family back home, right? In Japan. So that is just naturally just from uncovering stories that now we have this wonderful story about this soldier, this private, with a face, what he liked, what he did. And that's the whole story now. What we're trying to do is take the names on the monument and actually put a face behind that name. Find out that they were a sailor, or they liked the water, or maybe they had a family of 8 and left behind 6 brothers and 2 sisters, or maybe a single child, knowing that their mother and father mourned their loss for the rest of their own lives. So that's what we're now able to share. And as Ryan mentioned, this is only the tip of the iceberg, in the sense that through digital programs with AI being able to retrieve things, this is not a once we have a story, it's done. This profile will continue to evolve, and that's the best. For me, that's what that enhanced experience on the site is, that we may have a little bit of information, or maybe a lot of information on a soldier, but it's only going to take one person coming to visit with their mobile phone, scan a name, and then for them have that personal interaction. And who knows, it may then trigger, oh, by the way, in my attic, I have a chest full of pictures and stories on a particular soldier. And I think that's the exciting piece, is that we, as our organizations, as these tools become more personable to the visitor, we're only going to be able to further enhance these stories. So those names will always continue to live in our collective memories.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the possibility of linking organizations, linking to this
Yeah.
museum in Japan, all of those things are really the most interesting part for me, certainly, is bringing all that stuff together. I know you mentioned already the personnel records, and these are files that are digitized, fully digital, and kept at Library and Archives Canada. How did those help bring these stories to life? I think you've touched on that already, but let's just go into a little bit more detail. What was it, those personnel records that helped the team kind of really start to build these stories?
Yeah, so it has some tombstone information. The enlistment would have been where they enlisted from, their hometown, the already with a height, weight, maybe there was a scar on a left forearm or
Hmm.
things of that. So you're already putting a bit of a profile to it. But what we were able to do is take some key pieces. You know, if he was a farmer in a particular community, we went and did some search on that community versus his name or maybe the regiment, and started to uncover other pieces. And then from there, once we had enough information, then we found, which is the local museum or the local historian. And it's amazing how much information is actually kept in, by
Hmm.
these local historians, or a small association, maybe built of 3 people that are very enthusiastic, but there's such a wealth of information out there. And we just so happen, you know, every day a phone call was made and a connection made. And then next thing you know, you have another piece of the story. And this is how these profiles were able to be created here. And ultimately for the VAC team, what initially the intent was to create these profiles, we get them on panels and make them available to visitors on site.
Hmm.
And then soon came to realize, hey, there's a bigger potential here. We can put this stuff into digital space, you know, both from in-person visits, how many people have come to the profiles and said, wow, I didn't know that, or you know what, my uncle or my dad served in that particular regiment, or I remember this, and those stories now get told. Um, and then with the Living Memorial app, when it was first launched, you know, that was that first segue of, hey, we're bringing these back to more Canadians, and we were able to get that tombstone information out. But now
Hmm.
with the memory anchor on board, and the addition of the living stories, like, well, we're just bringing one step further, right? And and I honestly believe this goes beyond the Vimy Memorial, right? This is something that visitors will now become more attached to, knowing that they can understand, learn more about, not just about their own families, but it could be that it was the the best friend that served with Uncle Bob, right? And understand their story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the connection to small local communities, I think, is the thing that's also really interesting, that information that a community may have kept for, the last 100 years, and it's in a library somewhere, or it's doing something, that it can all be brought in and disseminated to so many more people is such an interesting aspect of this. So turning back to you again, Ryan, just to think about the impact and the future of this wonderful project that we've been working on. How are you how do you see technology like this evolving, to enhance historical education and remembrance? What do you want to see?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're currently working on that constantly. So, one of the things that I'm quite interested in is when we have very sparse information, maybe the end of a line for a family where there was no kids or siblings that continued on, and we only have a very limited amount of information. We're working on stuff like contextual AI, which takes the date the person was killed, the regiment they were killed in, and is able to go, well, what was this regiment doing at that time? And being able to go, okay, so if this person was with this regiment in this part of the Somme at this time, this was during the 100-Day War, near the end of the war. You can give some context back to that person that we might not have. So the technology and what's possible is really, really exciting. Again, from our view is we lost like 1.7 million Commonwealth soldiers during that war. That's a huge amount of data. Canadians, the number escapes me, it's around 60,000 Canadians in the First World War. And that's a huge amount of information. And one of the only ways we can handle that right now to give these individual stories back is to engage with AI and really like John is saying, is Libraries Archive Canada or the Canadian Virtual War Memorial. I work with many partners around the world in different commemorative organizations and governments, and they always look at Canada's records with a lot of envy because it's been really well kept. And what could be done with that information is absolutely, it gives me chills because it's the groundwork is set, and now it's about how do we use the technology in a meaningful and ethical way. And I think ethical is important too. To connect those stories. So, OCR, when you're scanning the grave, that's really cool technology. But what's going to be really, really impactful again is the story and the ability to connect. Like even being able to put some genealogical information in about yourself and all of a sudden have connections made between yourself and potential people that you didn't know. Maybe there's a distant relative, or just being able to ask the technology, how many people were from Calgary and or information like that. And because what we want to do is use the technology to create empathetic connections, because if I can see myself in that individual that's being commemorated, it just changes the way I feel about the whole thing. It's a gateway to empathy. And so the technology is going to make a lot more windows and doors for people to go into when it comes to that empathetic experience.
Absolutely. And I think, you mentioned earlier how complete Canadian records are. And that's one thing that I think needs to be acknowledged is that we are extremely lucky to have the records that we have about the First World War. The First World War was one of the best documented conflicts, certainly one of the first to be documented so well. And then on top of it, on the Canadian side, it's almost complete, which when you're looking at European countries or you're looking at, the UK and the Second World War coming in, and German records are partially destroyed. English records are partially destroyed. So, we are really lucky. And then we're doubly lucky that everything has been digitized as a very large government program during the centennial of the First World War, that you can access all of that, and for free, I might add. You're not paying for that. It's not a paid genealogical service. You can just look at that and you can go through it. And when I started doing research over a decade ago, I remember having to order the files one by one and get like a CD-ROM 6 months later, for one person, and what an experience that was. So we are, as you say, Ryan, we're extremely lucky to have this, and I think it's important for just to say that more often. We are really lucky that this has been done well, because we all use it. This project is based on that trove of data, and if we didn't have it, we'd be, really in much less of a position to be able to tell this type of stuff. So, just to call out our wonderful First World War record keeping habits.
Absolutely, Caitlin. And how many times have we all probably gone down the rabbit hole of starting to do a quick research, and 3 hours later we're still
Yeah,
we're
3 hours
still
later,
inside of it, right?
you're sitting there
Yeah.
being like, oh, well, he has a tattoo. I wonder what this tattoo could be of, and it's yeah, just this funny things like that.
No, but it's important. I think you're absolutely right. We were not only do we have all this information, but it was kept, right. The
Yes.
plant, like, to maintain it, and now through digital digitization, it's now available, and that's the key piece, right? I've been fortunate to be at Vimy, working here in Europe for the last 7 years. And Caitlin, I agree. I do have one of the pretty cool jobs.
The cool jobs of the world.
And even in 7 years, I've seen a lot, right? In the sense that visitors came with a name. They show up at the visitor center and talk to a guide or one of the staff members, and we direct them up to the monument, and we'd be able to touch the name, and sometimes take out a piece of paper with a pencil, and they could scribe the name on a piece of paper. Technology has advanced, as you said, during the centennial period. A lot of the records were digitized. Now we have the ability. We had the ability to now start sharing a little bit more information. But with this Living Stories edition, and with the with the ability to kind of retrieve a lot of information, what we notice is that a lot of our visitors are now coming with a bit more information because they've done their research. They know
Mm,
where to go get the research. So they're coming not only with a bit of information on what their loved one or the name that they're coming to look for, um, but they're also coming prepared. Now I want to go walk the same paths or the same areas in France or Belgium. Because they've got the data is there that they now can almost retrace right back to where maybe the second line or the third line or where they would have been on a particular day, and they want to go back to those locations.
mm,
And I think that's the cool period and a cool thing. And we've had to adapt because, you know, our guides generally are here for 4 months. They drink from the fire hose when they arrive, and they're here to interpret the Battle of Vimy Ridge from on site perspective. And now folks are coming with a lot more information and saying, well, I know my great uncle was in this particular battle in this particular area. So the technology as it advances is actually giving us the tools to be able to better serve them as well, right? Because we're going to be able to enter that information in and retrieve a little bit more, so guide them in the right places. And that's for me the best piece, because my as a steward of these sites, one of our for me, what makes me feel good is when a family member has come here, they visit the site, there's an exchange. There's an exchange either with our guides or with us within the staff, and that we're able to take a little bit from their story, but we're also able to give back. And that for me is, if we can do that, we've won the day
Hmm.
in terms of our visitor experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an addition, I think, and it's going to be really interesting to see, how your team takes that further and further,
Yeah.
and is able to continue to serve their audiences more and more as we go forward. So just to close out for both of you, we always like to have a good punchy takeaway at the end of everything.
mm.
So, Ryan, what are you hoping that users take away from this experience at the end of the day?
Well, what I hope is that it's as seamless as possible, that it's connecting them to the stories, and that they can see themselves in a story and they have an emotional experience from that. Because what we don't want them to see is, this software that they're using is 5 years of design. It is, it's millions of dollars of investment. Like, what they're actually using is something really phenomenal that I've been really passionate about. My team's been really passionate about, and the Vimy Foundation and Veterans Affairs Canada having the foresight to say this is the future. And so my hopes is that they don't have to think of that, and they go in and they experience those stories in a way, and they can just really honor those soldiers.
Absolutely. No wizard behind the curtain with like all the levers
Yeah,
standing
exactly.
on a box. And John, what's your hope? What do you want to see users take away from this?
For me, it's that enriched visitor experience. Is that be it a visitor that is able to make it to the site, pull out their phone and learn more about maybe their loved one or an ancestor or just a story of a Canadian, because how many people come and don't have necessarily a connection, but they just want to kind of peel the onion back on a particular soldier. For me, it's that Canada is still seen as the leader in commemoration, and that we're looking for new ways to connect the stories, that the Canadians don't lose the story of the First World War, of the Second World War. The living history around the First World War has been gone for nearly 15 years,
Mm,
yet I think it still remains top of mind for many, many, many Canadians. The 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 idea of needing to get to the Western Front, needing to visit these sites like the Canadian National Vimy Memorial is still relevant, not only for all Canadians, but especially the youth element,
mhm,
right? If we do not have the tools and develop tools that continue to evolve with our next generations, um, you know, we could easily in 20, 30 years from now what was the First World War? What soldiers? Now, I don't think it'll ever get to that. We've made large commitments on top from the government of Canada's perspective, from the Vimy Foundation, Memory Anchor. We've got really strong partners committed, not only from the Canadian side, but across the globe, be it the Commonwealth War Graves, be it other countries. Like, there is a real commitment to ensure that those names are never forgotten. And it reminds me, earlier this year, we repatriated the
Mm-hmm.
Newfoundland unknown soldier, and we had a delegation from Newfoundland, and fortunate to have the former Chief of Defense Staff, General Rick Hilliard, with us, and we were in a cemetery, and in his big voice, he grabbed everybody's attention, and he explained to the group that amongst his troops, anytime they walked into a cemetery, they made it a point to read a name out loud to keep that name alive. And that resonated with me. And I see this project similar to the same. Every time somebody comes to the monument, pulls their phone out and scans a name, they're keeping that name alive. And I think that's our legacy piece is we are players in that commemorative pool, if I could say, making sure that no name be lost.
Thank you, John. That's a really wonderful way to end our session. I appreciate it. So thank you both for joining us today to discuss this new feature. For our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about the app and try the feature yourself, you can visit the Vimy Foundation website at www.vimyfoundation.ca or download the Living Memorial app on the App Store or Google Play. So thank you both.